Hey, what's going on, everyone? This is Juskewycz of Daily Fantasy Winners, bringing you an episode of Tee to Green. And in this episode, I'm going to answer the question, what is upside in Daily Fantasy PGA? Now, you've heard the term upside in Daily Fantasy when it comes to a player having a higher ceiling. And usually this player can put up a lot of fantasy points for you and win you a lot of money and when you win your GPPs. Now, in team sports, usually this comes to a player having a higher snap count in football or having more at-bats in baseball or just more minutes on the court in basketball. Now, in golf, obviously, everybody's playing the same amount of golf holes unless we're talking about the difference of making the cut. But that is results-oriented. It's not like overtimes, per se, where you're just going to get more minutes for a competitive game based on the opponent. Everyone's playing the same golf course and going to play the same amount of holes unless it's the difference of making the cut. So this is why, though, there is one area, though, that's very distinctive when it comes to upside in GPPs for daily fantasy golf, and that is eagles. If you've taken a look at DraftKings' scoring in PGA, I'm sure you have, the better you do on a golf hole exponentially, the better your fantasy point production is going to be. If you have an eagle, you earn 8 points. If it's a birdie, you get 3 points. If it's a par, 0.5 points. It's a half a point for a bogey, and it is minus a point for a double bogey or worse. Now let's just even keep this to the difference between an eagle and a birdie. That is the difference between 8 and 3, which is the difference of 5 points. That is huge because when you look at the leaderboards, in terms of how many fantasy points you get for a golfer placing at a certain spot, the difference of 5 fantasy points between eagle and birdie is the equivalent of the difference between 11th and 50th on DraftKings scoring. That is a huge difference. So a lot of the times when I hear people say that they've given up in their lineups on Saturday when maybe the lineup only had one person miss the cut, I'll ask them, well, do you have a golfer or two that's in contention, and do you have a couple guys that put up an eagle or two? And they'll tell me yes. And I just think to myself, well, actually, I wouldn't give up on that just yet. They're not going to win the GPP necessarily, but they could still certainly cash in, at least double and maybe triple their money. So, and this is why I always tell people that examining the golf course in terms of the conditions, the par 5s, and the potentially drivable par 4s are so important before making your lineups. So, for example, let's say there's a par 72 and you've got 4 par 5s and a couple drivable par 4s. And also of the par 5s that they're much longer, but there's potentially, you can potentially make an eagle on them, but you need longer hitters for most of the par 5s and the drivable par 4s, that targeting those longer hitters and just giving you those eagle opportunities is extremely important because, like I just said, the difference between an eagle and a birdie is can be the difference between 11th and 50th on the leaderboard. So you can make up so much ground just with a couple holes there. When it comes to the eagle scoring. But now let's take this a step further. And let's say we've got another par 72 golf course, but maybe a couple of the par 5s are a little bit shorter, and maybe one of the par 5s particularly always plays downwind or it's downhill, and there's a lot of room, there's nothing guarding the front of the green, and players can roll their 3-woods up and they don't have to fly it there, and it's not a hard carry, or there isn't a lot of trouble around the green with water hazards and things of that nature. That is maybe a good idea to use maybe some average length hitters or shorter hitters. Why? The reason is longer hitters, generally speaking, usually have higher ownership in GPPs in daily fantasy golf, and that's a big deal when we're trying to get an edge on the field. If you can have players that have lower ownership but also have those eagle opportunities, and when they convert, that is going to give you the biggest edge by far in daily fantasy golf when it comes to your GPPs. I'll just give an example right here. Sawgrass is a perfect example of something I just mentioned. Hole 9 is the one par 5 there. It's like 580 some yards. You need to have a longer hitter who can rip his 3-wood there to a kind of a tucked in tough shot where the green kind of winds in behind the tree. But there are a couple par 5s on that course that are shorter with a lot of water around it, but still, a lot of those, pretty much every golfer is going to go for those greens in 2 as long as they find the fairway. And you'd be surprised how many daily fantasy PGA DFS players end up just choosing the longer hitters naturally because they think they're just the ones that make the most eagles. Statistically speaking, yes, but when you look at the specifics of a golf course, you can find a lot of those average length hitters or even some shorter hitters that can definitely rack up those eagles. So if there's one main thing here I I would take away is that finding players who have eagle opportunities plus the lower ownership is definitely the best upside in PGA Daily Fantasy scoring. And then, of course, you want guys that are going to be playing well, of course, as well. So that is it for this episode. I hope you enjoyed it. Please remember to like and subscribe our Twitch and YouTube channels, and you can follow me at Nick Juskewycz and Daily Fantasy Winners at DFSnerd. Thanks, everyone.